Hi, my name is Dana Golden. Today I'm going to talk about critical minerals and the shame of the modern world. We've talked a lot this semester about policies, cost-benefit analysis, and how to think about the analysis of economic variables. We haven't talked a lot about this semester how to think about how these actions affect people and how to make the actual decisions with the very complex problems that exist in the real world. So my hope is that this last optional lecture on environmental justice will give you a toolkit to think about how these messy issues exist in the real world. This is a lecture where I'm going to take a little bit more of a position than I have in the past, which is part of why it's optional. So this lecture is, about how you should think about the complex interactions between society and the environment in terms of an environmental justice framework. So without further ado, we are living in the era of metals. Now more than ever, metals from around the world are required for even the most basic products. The number of periodic table elements required to make consumer products has exploded over the past quarter century. Whereas rotary phones contain fewer than 10 different metals on the periodic table, a modern cell phone requires 46 elements. The metals used in the cell phone are highly difficult to substitute. The screen cannot make certain colors without europium and terbium, and modern technology would be absolutely nothing without the magical silicon that makes it all work. The critical mineral supply chain is a long one and requires metals from all over the world to be extracted in one country, refined in another, and combined to make products. Metals are often invisible, but they are essential to our ways of life. Their journeys from the dirt to our pockets has immense impact on the lives of people we will never meet in surprising and sometimes incredibly damaging ways. Exploitation in the commodity sector is in no way a new trend. It is one of the oldest features of mercantile and now capitalist economies. Most industry classes focus heavily on exploitation within the agricultural sector and how slaves languished in the fields of the American South picking cotton or died in Haiti on sugar plantations. However, metals are fundamental to the heart of capitalism. The story of the Industrial Revolutions and the rise of the computer age are in fact the stories of small improvements in the production and usage of steel and copper. Mining has a history of colonial exploitation far more superior than agriculture that continues to this day. Starting with the Columbian Exchange, South America was plundered by the Spanish for its metals, particularly iron ore, gold, and silver. At the Potosi silver mine in Bolivia, for instance, thousands of indigenous people were forced into slavery to feed the Spanish conquerors' hunger for raw materials. Then 60,000 African slaves were brought to continue the mining practices. Without sufficient protective equipment, many suffered gruesome deaths. Much of South America was forced to become banana republics with limited economic development outside of the sector of commodities. These countries suffer to this day from a legacy of default and economic desperation, even with the tremendous economic potential. The most heinous metals exploitation, however, happened in Africa, where an entire continent was ripped apart for its resources to feed the machines of the industrial age. Not only was labor harshly exploited by European actors, but also European nations prevented the modernization of industries in Africa and redrew colonial tribal boundaries in order to create neat objects for organization of colonies. The legacy of colonialism lives on to this day. The modern world has not escaped the history of metals exploitation. In a world that continuously seems to be more and more intangible and in the cloud, mining has grown exponentially. In fact, we are living at the moment in a material age fueled by work of workers in the third world. China remains a leader in rare earth metals and metals in general. China has substantial rare earth resources and also the most significant operations for refining of most other types of metals, such as lithium and nickel. When China does not have mineral resources, the Middle Kingdom has begun to use a new form of colonialism to retrieve those resources from poorer countries. China makes loans to countries in Africa and becomes an owner in substantial infrastructure in countries when default occurs. China also engages coercive labor practices closer to home. The Uyghur people, historically Muslim ethnic Chinese in Western China, have been subjected to forced labor and brutal working conditions in a high-tech surveillance state. The greatest metals exploitation occurs within the Congo, where forced labor and artisanal mining rule the day. While Congo is rich in cobalt and other metals, crucial to modern society, corruption and modern-day slavery have stunted development and prevented the riches of these mines from reaching the people. Unfortunately, once minerals exit the Congo and find their way into the metal supply chain, there's truly no way to tell where they came from and whether or not they're linked to slavery. The overwhelming likelihood is that significant portions of the metals used by pretty much every Western technological company find its routes in exploitative labor in the Congo. The mines in the Congo are supposed to be automated and highly safe, but this is simply not true, with many automated mines composed almost entirely of people dragging stones from place to place. The exploitation of labor has played a central role in the brutal costs associated with the metals age. Other stakeholders also face significant harms. In particular, local communities must deal with the strain of mining. In some South American towns, the advent of new technologies to get more out of older mines has led to increasing debris from mines that have enveloped surrounding town, forcing residents to move elsewhere. Even though the mine provides good jobs for those in the region, by ruining the landscape and destroying the town, it forcibly displaces many of those whose lives it is designed to improve. Indigenous people have had to deal with significant upheaval for centuries, but recent pushes for mining ever more rare metals have outside impacts on native land. In Australia, specifically a region of Australia called the Pilbara, known for its iron ore resources, Rio Tinto, a prominent mining company, received permits from the Australian government to build a mine and in the process to destroy Junkin Gorge. Junkin Gorge is one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites in human history, with human habitation going back 40,000 years. At the site, archaeologists found a belt made of human hair that was 44,000 years old and found DNA testing to be related to local Aborigines. The Aboriginal people were not made aware of the process to prevent the destruction of the full extent of the damage. Destruction was devastating to the indigenous people and a major PR hit to Rio Tinto that eventually culminated in CEO resignation. Right now, Resolution Copper is in the works for development. It will be the first copper mine opened by the United States in years and a significant resource of domestically mined copper. However, the project is hung up because it falls on land of historical and religious significance to the Apache. The argument between those who want to protect the legacy of indigenous people and save the world from climate change is incredibly difficult and politically charged. How should these competing aims be weighed? It should not surprise anyone in this room that mining is not the most environmentally friendly activity. It rips a hole in the ground that is difficult to repair and restore to original conditions. Mining can also devastate local wildlife, as it can lead to pollution of the water supplies. This makes it crucial for mining companies to responsibly mine, something mines outside the developed world often shirk. With all the evils inflicted upon environment and mankind in the pursuit of the molecules that make up cell phones, laptops, and Toyotas, it can be easy to characterize the metals industry as dirty and evil. It may be easy to write off the industry and attempt to turn a blind eye. However, the world is in the middle of an energy transition to fight climate change. For this energy transition, we will require metals, lots of them. The simple truth is that electricity means copper. We will have to mine more copper than we've ever produced before. Electricity generation via renewable resources requires significantly more metals than electric generation via fossil fuel resources. Whereas coal and natural gas have high variable costs and require constant feeding of generators by fuel, wind and solar have high fixed costs and require major investment in minerals before usage. These resources do not simply require more minerals, they require more diverse sets of minerals. So if you look at this graph, it shows the metals used by offshore wind, solar PV, nuclear, coal, and natural gas. As you can see, the newer technologies, particularly offshore wind, are significantly more metals intensive. So there is an environmental cost even to these environmentally beneficial technologies. Here again, we see the metals used in different R-types. You can see electric vehicles use a lot more metal. It's really intensive on nickel and graphite to make a battery. And that has environmental costs, even though environmental resource vehicles are good for the environment. And even though that's very good for the environment long term, you have to do a life cycle analysis to make sure of that. And then finally, over time, more metals will be used to fight climate change. So this is a graph of the projected usage of metals projected by IEA, the International Energy Agency. This is the demand for climate change for metals over time. And you see this reddish every other usage decrease, keep decreasing, and then start increasing around 2045, 2050. So you see that there's going to be a lot of metals required by the renewable energy transition, and that's going to put a strain on the supply chain. It's going to put a strain on the environment that we have to think about. And one thing I don't think a lot of people realize is that the renewable energy transition is fundamentally an infrastructure transition. It is, a built environment transition in a way a lot of people don't think about. More problematically, many environmental technologies are heavily reliant on cobalt from the Congo, a lithium mined in South America. Lithium represents substantial challenges to mining because it's the most reactive metal on the periodic table and has a tendency to catch fire when being mined. New techniques are being created to mine lithium more safely, but right now it remains remarkably dangerous. With the onset of clean energy revolution, mankind has the potential to save itself from the evils of a fossil fuel age. We can defeat the existential risk of climate change and pay the debts to our planet that our grandparents passed to us. In our rush to beat climate change, we should not hastily leave our children with their own crisis. Metals mining can be done sustainably and responsibly, but if we fail to live up to these goals, if we shirk our responsibilities, we are simply trading one unsustainable, non-renewable resource for another. It's also easy to try and pretend that you can somehow absolve yourself of complicity in the mining industry. You can buy local. You can simply wash your hand of investing in companies and participate in these industries. This is a false narrative. In the modern world, there is no escape from complicity in the metals and commodities trade. If you own a phone, if you drive a car, and if you live in a house, you take part in the exploitation of men, women, and children and the enslavement of Africans in the Congo and Muslims in Western China. By simply turning a blind eye to this industry, you fail those people as they now must suffer in silence. If you refuse to invest in companies complicit in these practices, you forfeit any ability to control the conduct of these companies. So what can be done about this old and dark industry? First, we can act as consumers and as owners of capital to hold companies accountable and require them to implement ethical sourcing for critical minerals, or at least attempt to implement those sourcing. Next, we must establish a sustainable pipeline for metals. First and foremost, this means finding ways to mitigate pollution from mining. This also means increasing recycling in the metals industry. In most industries, recycling only saves about 20% of the recycled good. Recycling is in many ways a lie perpetrated by fossil fuel companies. However, in metals, these numbers can be as high as 90%. We also need to find ways to make steel production more environmentally friendly and less reliant on coal, or at least less reliant on unmitigated coal emissions. Finally, we have to mine in the United States. Look, no one wants a mine in their backyard. It is a desecration of the land. Many oppose mining on the grounds that it is dirty and it will make this beautiful land ugly. However, not mining is not an option and will only lead to the destruction of civilization as we know it. Exporting the ills of extraction to places we cannot see it may be a tempting option. However, by doing so, the United States fails to live up to its promise and yields a moral authority to those countries that are willing to live in the real world and accept the burden of solving this crisis ought not fall solely on those who did not cause it. The United States is not the most green nation on the planet. However, it has standards of air pollution and environmental protection that put other resource-rich countries to shame. The United States is a far from perfect record on labor exploitation and labor standards, but is much better on this front than many other mining nations. We must promote permitting reform to make it easier to build mines and streamline the bureaucratic process to open mines while upholding the environmental standards of the Clean Air Act. We must not withhold the beacon of American markets from the world. Instead, we must work with countries that already have good standards and hold other countries accountable, and utilize control over our markets and the concept of free and fair trade to promote equitable labor standards. It is a fallacy that allowing developing countries to exploit labor so they can grow is beneficial to the workers. In point of fact, no one would benefit from the rule of law and protections of labor regulations more than the people of Xinjiang and the Congo. Refusing to intervene on labor's behalf only ensures that what gains accrue to those least worthy, those willing to exploit the corruption at the heart of the system. Similarly, we should find ways to allow the countries that will face the most significant burden of mining to take part in some of the economic growth of the manufacturing sector that will use the mined minerals. We should have countries like Indonesia and like Bolivia and Chile that have all these minerals develop downstream, and so that they don't just become mineral extraction powerhouses. Unfortunately, mining more will mean hard choices. Mining more will mean the displacement of peoples, and yes, occasionally the desecration of religious sites held holy by those already marginalized. These are not issues that to be dismissed. However, the United States and the West are better prepared than other countries to recognize the risk of mining and work alongside stakeholders to reach equitable solutions and to properly consider the cost-benefit trade-off when difficult decisions must inevitably be made. If we are to remain a global commodity superpower in the clean energy age, we must embrace a level of pragmatism. Thank you. This has been the end of the environmental economics class. It was really a pleasure getting to work with all of you. Grades will be up soon. And yeah, if you ever need anything, if you ever need help with anything, reach out. Like I said, I really am a believer that my success is dependent on your success, and I want you to have good labor market outcomes. And I want you to take what you learn in this class and apply it to the very complex issues that are facing our generation. Someone has to fix this. Why not let it be you?